Today, our nation buries a president, President Gerald Ford. A president who lived in a time a lot like we live in today. The things that President Ford was dealing with, things like oil crisis, a war, a divided country. What was so special about him? How could he come into that moment and bring healing? Well, today we're speaking to his minister, his pastor, Reverend Robert Surton. Out there's just a line of vans and a line of satellite dishes. People talking about President Gerald Ford and talking about, of course, his presidency. But one of the things that I want to touch on today with you specifically is President Ford, the man of faith.
They've been members of this parish since they left the White House back in the mid-70s. And so they were around during the years the church was growing very, very rapidly. He was part of the effort to build the new church building that was put up in the late 1980s. They participated in helping to raise funds and in groundbreakings and dedications for our school, which was put up in the early 1990s, and they've always been part of what it is to bring people together. I'm sorry about this. Let me turn it off.
You're a busy man. Don't worry about it.
We'll just let that go to voicemail.
How did you see his humility as his pastor? How did you see him as that humble servant?
For people who have lived in the public eye and have been in very powerful and prominent positions in the society, are what I would call just like you and me. They're very normal and unassuming people. They didn't require special deference of any sort. In fact, they were often concerned that they would be imposing on my time rather than demanding of time. And the Fords basically were servants of the servants of God. They were people who dedicated their lives to care for other people. And as president, he exemplified that, and as a senior statesman, he has.
He once said, "I need your prayers," as he was walking into the presidency. You're not giving me your votes, but what I need is your prayers. Was there a prayer that President Ford prayed with you regularly? Was there a popular prayer for him? I know that just over a week ago you went and gave him communion. What was that moment like, and the prayers that you shared with him in that moment?
It was his Christmas communion. He and Mrs. Ford obviously were not going to be here because of health issues this year, and so they asked me to come and bring it to them, which was my standing offer always.
Yeah.
So that was a touching time. Two of the sons were present at the time also, so it was more of a family service and quite intimate for us.
Why do you believe God put him in the presidency for that moment in our country's history?
His presidency was a time of healing. And it was not just the healing from Watergate. The country had been at war with itself for a decade. Vietnam was ongoing, and unlike today, returning veterans were treated with disdain. And we had the civil rights movement where blacks and whites were battling each other in the streets of our cities. We had the women's movement where women were taking more prominent leadership positions in business and government, and upsetting a lot of men at the same time. And so there was this huge systemic struggle within the society during the decade of the 1960s and early 70s. This man, who had already set down his life's ambition to become Speaker of the House in order to become Vice President, then also acted again for the well-being of the whole nation, and not his own political ambition, by choosing to pardon Richard Nixon for Watergate crimes and what have you, so that the country could then begin its healing process for the whole decade.
When we hold on to that anger, and it doesn't allow us to heal. It doesn't allow us to go through that healing process. That's why God's forgiveness to us is so important. From 1974 on, he was known as Mr. President. But today, he stands before God, not as Mr. President, but as son. You see, God isn't concerned about the position you hold, but the life you live. What type of legacy are you leaving? What will people say about you when you're gone? And how is your life affecting the kingdom in eternity? Because that's what's real today. What is your fondest memory?
The year after I came here, I was retiring from the Air Force Reserves and was doing my final reserve days at the Air Force Academy, and he drove down. For reservists to get anybody of distinction to come to a retirement ceremony is right unusual. For a reserve chaplain, it's extremely unusual to have even the active duty commanders come to your retirement service ceremony, and to have a former president drive down from Beaver Creek all the way to Colorado Springs was a most gracious and welcome event, so that not only did he come, but because he came, other people came, not for my retirement, but so they could shake his hand. But that's okay, they were there to help eat the cake.